Greetings, friends. The federal election in Canada is this Monday, April 28th, 2025. Canadians will decide whether we continue with more Liberal Party rule after more than about a decade, or will we switch to the Conservative Party of Canada under Pierre Poilievre. Now, I've been thinking how to vote. I'm pretty much decided. I will say at the outset that voting is a ritual. I do not say that you should abstain from voting. Perhaps we should vote. Very much so. We may say that we should vote. But voting usually does not influence real power. Just look at the United States. They voted Donald Trump in a second time, and just like the first time, what did you get? Not much, more of the same. I'll have to do a separate video on that. No, democracy, elections usually don't work. Only maybe in small societies which are homogeneous do they have a real effect. Power comes top down, people need to be told what to think, and the Overton window, as it's commonly understood, isn't a real thing. Now I'm going to look at the difference in platforms between the Conservative Party of Canada and the People's Party of Canada, which for me are the only two options. I'm not going to look at the Liberal Party of Canada and their platform. I just don't have the space to do that in this video, but I'm not going to vote for the Liberals because we've had them for about a decade already and it's been awful. But nor do I see the problems in Canada as having begun with Justin Trudeau. That's absurd. They began with his father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and also with Brian Mulroney, who was a Conservative. Perhaps you could push the problem back further than that, but that's really the seed of our current issues. Pierre Elliott Trudeau paved the way for official multiculturalism and mass immigration into Canada, and Brian Mulroney paved the way for Canada to become a colony of the United States, which in effect did occur. Prior to any of the current 51st state talk, the domination of the US over Canada had already been achieved in some manner. But before I get into looking at the difference in the two platforms and what I ultimately will decide, well, I'll give it away. I mean, I'm not going to vote Conservatives. I'm going to vote for the People's Party of Canada. Maybe that's throwing my vote away, and maybe I'm influencing some more years of pain under the Liberals. I mean, I don't think my riding is going to go for the Conservatives. I live in the city, close to the downtown, so this is the sort of riding that will vote for Liberals or NDP. I can't imagine it voting for the Conservatives. But even if it did, as we'll see, would it really make that much of a difference? And that's what we're going to have to decide. Or maybe I'll be able to persuade you on a few things, but at least explain to you how I see it, which is not all that much. I don't think there would be all that much long-term difference. Because on the core issues, these are both globalist parties, the Conservatives and the Liberals. Now, one annoyed lady was telling me on Twitter, X, and because I was asking her that same question, are they really all that different, these two parties? And she was saying, well, one is communist and one is not. Okay, so communist has become a derogatory word. Of course, I don't support communism, but it's kind of a low effort thing. It's not really an argument because you can call a lot of things communism. Like we lived under COVID, Doug Ford as our premier, head of the Ontario ruling Conservative Party, similar to the National Conservatives, and we lived under totalitarian COVID policies with him. It was obviously very corrupt what he was involved with, but that's not communism. I mean, I don't believe it is, but the word communism is thrown around kind of like any other sort of word these days, just as a derogatory word. I want to know what's the real difference here between these parties. Now, obviously, the Liberals are more anti-white. The Liberals are probably more pro-immigration, but are they? Well, I don't know. I actually don't know on that question, but they are anti-Christian. The Liberals hate Christianity. They've shown that they hate white people, and they want to totally continue the project of deconstructing Canada. So in that sense, they are worse than the Conservative Party of Canada, but only to some degree, because on the question of immigration, as we'll see, the Conservatives don't have much to say at all. They actually have nothing to say about it, as far as I could see, on their online platform. They had nothing to say about immigration. The Conservatives! I don't even know if the liberals are going to say it. The liberals have said things already about limiting immigration. I don't know what they officially put on their platform because that's beyond the scope of this video. And you can't always take a political party seriously by reading their platform. It's not like they're actually going to do half of what they say they will, but you will get some idea of their outlook. And voting is just a philosophical exercise anyways. Not that you can't get the populace involved in politics. I'm not saying don't do that. So one final point before I get into the platforms here is that one idea that I couldn't understand about boomer conservatives, and maybe not all these people are boomers literally, but this kind of boomer conservative worldview, and I don't even necessarily mean to disparage boomers themselves, but this worldview may be prevalent among many of them who are conservative voters, not the liberal ones, or maybe the liberal ones too, just to an extent. But this idea that immigration was okay under Stephen Harper or in the 90s, or it was okay when it was just hundreds of thousands of people a year. But under Justin Trudeau, we had almost a million plus people coming in every year. In 5-6 years, we got millions of people added to the country in that short time period. Well, then that's not sustainable. That's overloading the economy, but hundreds of thousands of people, that's sustainable. That can be managed. That's good for the economy. Like, that to me is so baffling. Is that the divide between us ultimately? Conservative boomer voters or other people who see the immigration issue that way? That to me is a huge gulf in worldview. That you would think that it was okay under Stephen Harper because he was only bringing in hundreds of thousands of people, as opposed to Justin Trudeau, who was bringing in like more than 1 million per year. It's 500,000 people less in a country of only 30 million people. Don't worry, it's only the population of like Edmonton in 1 year. Don't worry, that's Stephen Harper. So that to me is ridiculous. Okay, so I'm here at the Conservative Party of Canada website, conservative.ca, and they list all of these information boxes here. And many of these points concern tax. I'd say about half of them here have the word tax in them. Different tax cuts. The first one is cut the income tax 15%. They want to cut the income tax for the lowest percentile of taxpayers, which they claim will save the average worker $900 per year, or the average family $1,800 per year. It's really nothing. That's a very small amount. That's pigeon feed with inflation and all the daily expenses. That's really not much. I guess it's a gesture in the right direction. Then they want to axe the sales tax on homes. And as I was reading more about this, they explained that they will, quote, incentivize municipalities to speed up permits, free up land, and cut housing taxes so homes can be built faster. I do not like this. Perhaps there are parts of Canada where this would be a good idea, but in the Greater Toronto area, no. We have enough homes already. We have enough condos already. There's too many people here. Many people need to go home to their home countries. The housing market needs to cool down. The situation needs to get under control. We don't need to feed these developers more incentives to eat up our green space, to turn this into more of a concrete jungle. What do you think is going to happen when you build the housing? That's just an incentive for more immigrants to come here and take up the housing. And then you're stuck back in square one. It's the same problem with highways. They get gridlock, the traffic volume increases, people complain to the government. The next election they build new highways, more space, and for a few years it's good. But because there's no resolution of the root cause, you have development, you have people now commuting and using these roads from further out from cities which are previously inaccessible to the big city. They're now using these highways, and you have more development, more immigrants coming into the country, and ultimately more cars on the road. So you end up with the same gridlock as you had before. This is the same situation with housing. You're not addressing the root cause, which is third world migrants flooding into our country, especially into our big cities. Stop that flow and let the market gradually adjust. Then some other things on their platform, they want to lower taxes and secure retirement for seniors. They have this thing called Boots Not Suits, where they bring back $4,000 apprenticeship grants and they make things easier for tradesmen to travel and have tax write-offs and generally make it easier. So that's good. I support a lot of these things in principle, but do they really matter in the big picture if you're not limiting mass immigration? They have another thing about taxes here, and then they have this thing called Unleash Canadian Resources. They're into pipelines, mining, forestry, all the resource extraction industries, growing the economy, which is a mixed bag. I mean, of course, I support growing the economy. I don't live out west. I'm not going to comment about something which is beyond my scope. But all I can say from my vantage point is that I support the idea of cutting back at least a number of regulations, because Canada is over-regulated for sure. That's obvious. We're one of the most regulated countries on earth. Why, I assume we are. Maybe some European countries are more regulated. But is the regulation actually a good regulation? The concept of regulation itself is not bad. So the other side of the coin is that unregulated things do often go bad. And I don't believe in environmentalism, but I believe in conservation. Like, local communities should want to preserve their forests and their natural habitats. That is a good thing. I don't believe in these globalist environmentalist policies. That's what I take environmentalism to be, where you're actually disconnected from concrete reality in front of you. Ultimately, yes, I agree with this. Canada does need to go back to its resources, because that's our main asset, is our natural resources. But that doesn't mean that limiting regulations itself is going to solve the problem. You have to ensure who it is that's actually going to be manning the oil rigs and working in the mines. Like, are you going to bring over foreign workers to do that? Or are you going to make local Canadians have the opportunity to do that? If it's the latter, then okay, then I'm more amenable to this proposal. Now, they have a point in their platform I do agree with, which is called Canada First, a National Energy Corridor, where they basically want to have the oil and the natural gas and all other important resource flows bypass the United States, but link up with the rest of the world market, and thereby increasing Canadian sovereignty, Canadian independence economically. I do actually support this. This is a good idea. And Donald Trump has some responsibility for this, whether he intended it or not. I guess I could thank Trump for that. All the parties are moving in that direction, though. The Liberals are probably moving in a similar direction, too. So, yeah, they have about, 16 to 20 points here, but half of them are about tax cuts. They have a few points that are about getting tough on crime, which, again, I could support. Canada does have a lot more crime these days. They want to shut down tent cities. We do need to do this. They included a point about increasing Canada's presence in the Arctic, building icebreakers, building the military hardware needed to assert military presence in the Arctic. That's another thing I agree with the Conservatives on. I'm glad they're going in that direction. Going back to the old ways before Brian Mulroney of having more east-west connections in Canada, linking Canada to the rest of the world and asserting Canada's sovereignty. So their platform basically boils down to the following. We're going to give you material prosperity. We're going to strengthen Canada as an independent country, tough on crime, and building 2.3 million homes. They include that somewhere. They say they're going to build 2.3 million new homes. But I don't like that part of their platform. I don't want them to build 2.3 million new homes. Maybe they need to build 500,000 homes or whatever new homes in various parts of Canada. But as a whole, I don't think that's a good idea. Canada doesn't need more homes because we have too many people here. We have too many foreigners. Once we can get the native indigenous European Canadians to reproduce at a higher rate, then maybe we can talk about having more housing. And if the whites don't reproduce, well, ultimately, civilizations go up and down. There's a lot of talk of doom and catastrophe, but when haven't we been hearing of doom and catastrophe? We've been hearing of doom and catastrophe every year, all the time. Okay, we're going to have doom and catastrophe. It's coming. So nothing, not a single point by the CPC on immigration in their platform. Amazing. That is the killer. That's really the killer, because that is the fundamental issue. You're going to get a little bit more money, little bit more economic freedom for 5, 6, 7 years. Meanwhile, the root cause is continuing. People are pouring in here. They're going to jam up all the space. There's going to be less supply of housing. You're not going to be able to keep up with it. Do you know how many people live in India and China? Like more than 2 billion people in those two countries combined. Not to mention Latin America. Now we're seeing so many Latinos here. It's becoming just like Mexico here. But I guess we can save a little bit of money, a few $1,000s per year. But it would be good to strengthen Canada's economic independence. If that happens, that's not bad. That's a good step in the right direction. But how can we speak of independence if your people, the culture that you recognize as Canadian, is completely swamped? What would that mean to have economic independence as a state? Would it mean much? And by the way, I'm just throwing this in there to reiterate again, settlers and pioneers were not immigrants. An immigrant is not a settler, an immigrant is not a pioneer. The two are different categories. The Canadian nation was founded by pioneers and settlers, and immigrants came later, and that's fine, and they assimilated to the former framework, the former culture. So now switching over to the People's Party of Canada, which of course is not going to gain any seats, maybe 1 seat, 2, I don't know, maybe they'll get a seat, I don't know. I mean, they're obviously not going to get in, but voting, as I said, is not really about influencing power. This is just a ritual and intellectual discussion we participate in. So let's look at what they're saying. Many of the things they say are actually liberal, but they have some based things as well, and the based things outweigh their other liberal ideas, because most of us have inherited a liberal worldview by virtue of living in the current day. That's going to be inevitable for many people. So I can excuse that in politics you have to speak the liberal language, but many of the things in their platform are very based, of course, on immigration. There's nothing that I read here about them increasing housing. They were speaking of cooling down the housing market, putting a moratorium on immigration. They didn't say anything about building all these homes and then letting the masses from all around populate them. They say Canada's immigration policy can benefit Canadians only if we welcome the right kind and the right number of immigrants. I mean, they're trying to be diplomatic here. They can't just come out and say, no more immigration. So I can excuse some of this. But obviously, I'm not going to agree with everything they say. They're at least introducing the idea that we should limit the immigration, and it should prioritize the economic interests of Canadians. So it's raising the question of who is a real Canadian. Then they have a section on gender ideology where they're going to clamp down on all the woke stuff. And this has always been kind of a distraction. It doesn't really impact too many people the way that economic issues do, the way that mass immigration does. It's always been kind of a distraction. However, it's good to see this where you don't see anything express about this in the Conservative platform. The most non-woke things in the Conservative platform were being tough on crime. To be tough on crime is necessarily going to make you against woke. However, to actually expressly take on gender ideology, that's head and shoulders above anything the CPC had on their platform. So this is a genuinely based thing. This is not liberal values here. They're asserting traditional gender roles and agreeing that men shouldn't be going into women's bathrooms. I wouldn't say that's exactly a distraction, because in a city, many women actually have had to encounter that. But I still think overall this is a distraction issue, but I agree with the direction. That's a real based value that they're expressing here. Another reason I would vote for them. Then they have a section on Canadian identity, preserving Canadian values and culture, and I'm not going to read everything there, but they're talking about the need to assimilate. They do acknowledge that Canada had an aspect of multiculturalism in the past. They take multiculturalism to be like how the French were there, the various European peoples. They retained aspects of their former cultures, but they still assimilated. I mean, I wouldn't even agree with them. They include the Inuit as like a Canadian people and like the indigenous. Like I would say those were parallel other peoples. But of course, you can excuse their liberal worldview for the other based things in their platform, which outweigh the other more superficial things. Mass immigration, that counts for like 50 points. Oh, we believe in democracy. Everyone should be able to have their religion here, which is one of their beliefs. So they would allow Islam in Canada. But that's going to count for only a few points if you're not letting in that many people from Muslim countries, right? You see where I'm going? They say in their platform, we most focus on what unites us as Canadians, not what divides us, but they don't really have much to say on what that actually is. Like, they don't say the Christian word. But at some point, you're going to have a party that expressly identifies Christian values. You're going to have to move in that direction. But still, I approve of this message generally. They have other sections here on foreign policy, global warming and environment. They say they're rejecting climate alarmism, public finance, balancing the budget and then cutting taxes. I like the way they phrased that. They said balance the budget and then cut taxes. It is true that we live in a society overridden with debt. Government debt, everyone's in debt. We have to start winding this down at some point. But it's also true that fiscal conservatives have been saying this since the 90s, and no one ever pays attention to us. And to some extent, maybe we've been proven wrong. I wouldn't say I'm a necessarily fiscal conservative, but it doesn't seem to me right to run a civilization on debt. But they have, in fact, run empires on debt for many generations. But sooner or later, it all comes crashing down. And it puts your society under much more obligations, much more strains to exist year to year in this overburdened situation. So at least they're recognizing that. And then they talk in their section on housing. They acknowledge with the conservatives that housing is a real problem. The average Canadian can't get a house. But they identify this with mass immigration. It's a simple matter of supply and demand. So they say housing is primarily a provincial or local responsibility. So in summary, I guess it would be better for the conservatives to win the election, but it would only just be better for a short time, is what I'm trying to say. Pretty soon the same problems would creep back. And at what point do we say enough is enough? There's no point in shaming PPC voters like you're going to cost us the election, because it really does come down to the party itself. Are they able to convince Canadian voters to vote for them? So don't blame it on other people if they're not convinced. The PPC has way more things that I want to see happen for the country. They're not perfect, they're liberal. People criticize Maxime Bernier, maybe justifiably so. I don't know that much about him. But I mean, in politics, no one's really that great. I don't think you could say any of the leaders are particularly great. You're just trying to move forward a platform. You're trying to move forward some policies. Maybe he's not the guy to do it. But okay, so you don't vote at all, or you don't vote for or you vote for the Conservatives instead because of that, because you don't trust Bernier as a leader. I mean, again, it's all irrelevant anyways. Pierre Poilievre is constantly photographed with Sikhs. He's constantly in photographs wearing the Sikh headgear, that colorful bandana or whatever color is the occasion. It's the wrong message. It's a globalist approach to Canada. Hasta luego, amigos.